we've kind of had the overall state perspective from our executive director. We've got a federal highway perspective. Last for this session then will be a bridge, kind of the bridge program perspective from our state bridge engineer. Carmen Swanwick joined the state 7 years ago. In 2009, she had traveled around the country on a lot of design build projects prior to that. And when she joined UDOT in 2009, there was no bridge management group. So about 3 years ago, we took bridge inspection and moved it into bridge management, which created a lot more asset management strategies, planning and programming, all to kind of tie into our project delivery efforts already. So please welcome Carmen Swanwick to the podium.
Well, thank you for having me here today. So, as Josh said, we really kind of started bridge management a few years ago, and it all kind of transpired, and there are several people in this room that I know have worked really hard on making that happen. So I definitely want to send a thank you out to everybody that has been involved in this effort over the past few years. So I guess I'll just get back into it. And what I'm going to do, Carlos showed some of the slides, but the information I'm going to provide will kind of give you that background on how we got there. So within the presentation, I'm going to talk about our bridge management, a lot about the inventory and condition, how we're now approaching the planning, the performance measures we've established, the funding projections that we went over and over to actually get to that $47 million that we need for our bridge program, and then how we've kind of set up the bridge programs within the group. So I like to use this chart. It's really, that effective bridge management requires quality data, and you need inputs from each phase. So we really wanted to take that approach to actively manage the bridges, and we want them to remain in good condition. So we really looked at this holistic approach where we have the programming and funding that feeds into creating those projects for bridge design. And then you take your design to construction, and then after construction, as an owner, everybody knows that owns this now is really you have to operate it and maintain it. And you have to monitor that inventory through its life. And at points in its life, you'll be looking at preservation, rehabilitation, or replacement, and then working back into the planning aspect. So really, it's that big picture life of a bridge that we're looking at. So when we first started, Carlos asked me over and over, well, how much money do you need? What do you need? What do you need? And so we went rounds and rounds about how are we going to develop this and how are we going to get there. So really within the bridge management, what was the objective? We needed to look at each bridge, preserve bridges for that whole life cost. And it's almost like creating that plan for every structure. Operate in a financially sustainable manner. I mean, everybody knows you can't maintain an inventory at 100% of its bridge condition. We wanted to improve the performance on a long-term basis, but we also needed to evaluate, with the funding levels that we have, what do we think the outcome will be of those bridges based on the deterioration of bridges. Bridges deteriorate. So we went back, we looked at our inventory, and so the strategy amongst that is, with the number of bridges we have, the whole goal would really be to work on every bridge over a 20-year period. What that ends up being is we'll be working on 100 to 120 bridges every year based on our inventory numbers. And we also wanted to manage that in a state of good repair. So really, it was really trying to make that more proactive approach than a reactive approach. So this is part of the cover of the annual bridge report. It's all on the website. Like I was saying, we created a bridge management manual. It's on the website as well. It has a lot of information on how we manage bridges, what we do for emergency planning, our entire inspection program. So if you're really looking, to maybe make some changes within your group, I highly recommend looking at it. We spent a ton of effort on it. We do the annual bridge report for our region directors. This is something that I would give to Carlos. This is that snapshot every year of our bridge inventory. Tells you the number of bridges. The state-owned bridges, we have about 1,900. The local agencies, there's 140 of them. We have about 1,000 bridges in that category. So it really gives them a breakdown. If they get any questions within their region, they can go here for bridges. So this is the breakdown of age of in-service bridges. And I know a lot of states in the past have always managed bridges based on age. And we were really trying to get out of that mode. Just because it's 50 years old, this doesn't mean it needs to be replaced. So this is kind of a snapshot you can see in the 60s and 70s when most of the bridges were constructed in the state. This is more of a cumulative age distribution. So basically 20% of our inventory is 50 years or older, and that is based on the state system. But as you can see, as each year goes away, that is going to increase dramatically. So you can see why we wanted to get away from this age-based approach, not just replace a bridge because of its age, but we really needed to be evaluating its condition. So then we really tried to break it down. There was always this message in the past, well, it's 50 years old, you have to replace it. And we started looking at the condition of the bridges, and I kept saying, you guys are sending the wrong message. That's not where we're at right now. As you can see, this is the overall condition based on the NVIS system, and good, fair, and poor. You can see the poor in red. So obviously, can't be out there selling we're in terrible condition. We have 18 bridges that were classified as structurally deficient. So the approach really became to preservation. How are we going to maintain these? That's really the goal now. So because we have the different bridges, the state-owned and local-owned, so we broke it down even further into those. So with the state system, there was 18 poor, as I said. All of those have actually been programmed to be replaced within the next 5 years. Unless something falls down into a poor condition, we will have no structurally deficient bridges in Utah within 4 years. The locally owned system is really similar. If you really look at their system, they're about 4% in the deficient category. Obviously, though, that they need to be in a preservation mode of management as well. So we really took this approach from the management strategy. We classified how many good, fair, poor we had. So obviously in the good condition we want to preserve, so extend that service life. And so we want to look at each bridge and what preservation treatment would make sense for it. For fair, it could be preservation, but probably a little more rehabilitation activities or treatments would happen at that time. And then again, that poor, that's that 18 bridges that I mentioned, that we were just going to go out and replace. So, as Ivan said, we're in really good shape when it comes to the actual condition of our structures. So then we really tried to develop the planning aspect within bridge management. So it was addressing that existing service, bridge inventory, but also prioritize funding, because at this time we were only getting $20 million into the whole bridge program, which we had to use for preservation and replacement. And this money is just money that would go to the bridge program itself. Capacity projects are treated separately, so bridges that were within the capacity projects are funded through that project and not into our bridge program. So again, we tried to look at the whole process. So we came up with a Bridge Health Index, which really measures the overall condition of the bridge with weighted elements. We established a prioritization process, and within that Bridge Health Index, we evaluate the importance factors, the load rating, criticality, the vulnerability of each bridge. We looked at the deterioration models based on the inventory that we have. We do the life cycle cost analysis, risk analysis. We also work with our regions, and we try to combine projects whenever we can so that it makes sense. So here's a diagram that we use a lot to kind of show where we are with a number of bridges. I'm afraid to touch anything at this point. So here is the circle right here of the NHS system. And this circle right here would represent all the state bridges, and here are the local owned bridges. So with the NHP funding, obviously anything within here, a bridge would be eligible for that type of funding. I think we have about 1,300 bridges here, and then we have state money that we would use for the remaining of those state bridges. But there is also this sliver of locally owned bridges in this category that would be eligible for federal funding. So we include those when we plan and prioritize structures. The locals are required to come to the table with their match. However, we do support them in like planning their projects or the work they need on their bridges. The rest out here is off-system bridges, and they apply for Joint Highway Committee, through the Joint Highway Committee for funding to maintain their bridges. So that's just a snapshot of how we're set up here. So with the MAP 21, as you can see, it was always based on that 10% of total deck area. So I just kind of threw this up here. As you can see, we're like 1% deficient in deck area. And then even when we looked into the locals, that's up to a 3%. So even when we combine with the local system and the state system, we're well below even a 4% at that point. So we started looking at the historical data that we had available. So the green is the national trends, and the blue lines are Utah. And as you can see in here, there was a big spike that was happening in about 1998, 2000s. This is, I think, around the Olympics. There were a lot of bridges along I-15 that were rated in poor condition. And with the Olympics and the capacity projects, the design build projects that we had, we were able to replace those. So I can say by kind of looking at this data that our big capacity projects have really helped our bridge inventory get to the condition that it is today. So we've tried to set those performance measures. And as Carlos said, we're trying to establish based on the data that we have and what we think, good engineering judgment at this point. So on the NHS system for that Bridge Health Index, we were looking at that 85% or better. Like imagine this is the deterioration curve. This is the Bridge Health Index, how we have defined it along with the NBIS number to help those understand where that is. So this bridge would still be in good condition, maybe some minor problems, light cracking, some delams, but more or less in very good condition. I mean, you're never going to maintain anything at 100%. It's just not feasible. So then for the state system, we said, okay, some of those roads are not traveled as much. They're not the interstate necessarily. So we could have this range at that 80, 85, and that was something that Carlos has shown where, we don't necessarily know, but we think, based on engineering judgment, where we are with our bridge condition, we think that this is reasonable. So this is more that satisfactory condition. You can see there's a few potholes, moderate cracking, some delams, but overall it's still in, good to fair condition. But since we also, as I said, look at the local federal aid system, we kind of lowered that a little bit. They're not as traveled roadways. We said, okay, 75 to 80%. It's still satisfactory condition. It's before it really drops off onto a deterioration. But there's probably more potholes, more cracking, and things shown. So this is how we've kind of defined those performance measures. We're still working on them, but we figured that this would be a really good start for our program. So the funding projections, as I said, I was always asked, well, how much money do you need? How much money do you need? And so we went through and looked at different funding levels, and this would be all the lines. Not going to get into a ton of detail on it. And looked, where would we be? So this would be where the red line is where we want to maintain it. And this would be the funding level projection based on the deterioration of that system. And so that's how these lines were developed and how we came up with how much money we would need to fund a bridge program to maintain it in that good, fair condition. So that was the NHS. Same thing for the state, but again, if you remember, I kind of gave a range. So the red would be the range for that. And then this would be for the local federal aid system. So we went through that process, looking at different scenarios on where we thought we needed to be within the bridge program. So, then we had to say, well, how much money do we really need? So the scenario 1 here that is shown was really that structures only. This is that $20 million that we were receiving to begin with. So most of it went to replacements, but then we did have some money on state replacements and the local federal aid replacements as well. But we really weren't spending a lot of money necessarily on the preservation rehab aspects. So we went through different scenarios of where we were spending and what would be optimal. So based on those deterioration curves and the projections that we had shown, this is how we ended up distributing the money for our bridge program in this scenario 4. So each year, as we get up to it, eventually we'll be getting about $65 million into our bridge program. Some of this money will come from capacity projects, so the money that we would get from the bridge program is probably end up being about $50 million. And this was something just to show for comparison. So if we were just to stay with that 20 million, the replacements only, the bridge health index we projected would drop to a 77%. And as you can see, all these good bridges and fair, how many would drop into the 4 and just continue down the line for its condition. But where we wanted to be was up here at this optimal funding to maintain that bridge health index at that 86%. So this is all that background work that the bridge management team did so that we could go and say, well, this is the amount of funding we need to really maintain our system. This is just a table that basically shows the projections. 2015, we had the 18.7 million, but as you can see up into 2018 and 19, based on the work that we did, we'll be getting that additional money and up to that 51 million mark. So just getting into some of the bridge programs we have. So basically the funding that we get, we have 2 programs, and that's the bridge replacement and rehab program, and then the bridge preservation program. So we run our structure inspection program out of the money that we get from replacement and rehabilitation. As I said before, we inspect all the bridges in the state. We inspect for the locals as well. So all of them, they're not responsible for that. In our load rating program, we had a load rating program that was $11 million that we basically have load rated every bridge in the state over the last 5 years. So it'll be more of a maintenance program at this point to maintain those load ratings. With the bridge preservation, there's a bridge maintenance program where we use procurement contracting to get things fixed quickly to help with our maintenance division, so they can get the potholes fixed correctly. We have a scour program, so we take part of the preservation funding we get, we set aside probably $500,000 a year. That just goes to address bridges that are scour critical. We have 13 left, so probably over the next 4 years, we'll address all the needs of scour critical bridges in the inventory. And then we've also developed some like concrete deck protections. We'll set aside a certain amount a year to go out and just protect bare decks, or painted steel protection systems where we're just gonna go out and paint bridges that year. And same with parapet replacements and things like that. So we're really trying, to do these sub-programs within the major programs. And that's all I have. That's where we are with bridges in Utah. Thank you.